Can you say hi to the people? I gotta cover the news. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of the stories that I found most interesting this week in the AI space. Starting with this very Watchdogs-esque view of what the future looks like in terms of customer service, in terms of surveillance. And you can really quickly see what happens when we mix machine learning, artificial intelligence with the advantage of surveillance and cameras that can determine what's going on and frame by frame determine what customers are doing, what employees are doing. So this is a loss prevention tool as well as, well, a variety of other things. You know, assuming business owners and managers can use this tool to determine whether or not their business is functioning at peak efficiency, this is just yet another preview of technology that's going to get more and more common as time marches on. But speaking of time, let me take you back in time a little bit. And I don't want to say I told you so, but I did. I mean, I really did. Elon Musk, while signing the letter that said, hey, let's stop AI development, it's not safe, it's not fair, he was at the same time, of course, working on XAI, which is something that I talked about when it happened. But more recently, what they found, and the article covers it here, is he actually filed the registrations for XI the same month that the letter was being signed. He was actually using that time to poach talent from OpenAI, from DeepMind, the very places that were being called out in that open letter. And since it has been a little while since I talked about open letters, the circulation of it, nothing really took place, but I'll call out what I saw when I saw the letter come out. What it seemed like was really just a bunch of rich people and business owners, the ruling class, were seeing their businesses potentially swept away by this wave of AI that was supposedly going to wash everything away. And while that didn't happen, which is a good thing, what I said at the time and what I still believe was that that was just an attempt to get AI to kind of pause while they can get caught up. They didn't necessarily want it to stop, they just wanted to be part of the wave. And as you can see, as time has marched on, Twitter has become X, X is X.AI, and X.AI is eventually going to have something like Truth GPT as a part of it. Your tweets now, your X's or whatever you call them, are being used to train a large language model specifically for Twitter/X. I'm really not good at that name thing yet. And I would imagine, too, your media, the pictures, the videos, anything you're uploading to Twitter, it's all fair game as far as the language model or the models that are being trained by Twitter. And in the very same way as Adobe Stock did with the images that people were submitting, they can create something like Firefly and completely capitalize off of your copyrighted images, texts, things like that. And the funniest thing I think I see when I look at it from the Elon perspective is that he's actually getting people to pay him like $8 a month so that now he can capitalize off of them. Very interesting. But if you're wondering how a non-profitable company like X can afford to send out massive payments, you have to wonder, what are they getting out of that? And what it seems is, besides the engagement and the advertising revenue that comes along with being a platform, they're also, just like Facebook did back in the day, they're capitalizing on the data itself and finding new ways to make money on the same amount of information. But let's switch gears a little bit and talk about OpenAI. So as you know, GPT 3.5 has been out for a long while. It's the not so great version of what GPT-4 really is. GPT-4 kind of kicks it into high gear, gives you much better results, and probably costs OpenAI quite a bit more in the process. But 3.5 Turbo is faster, and as it turns out, when you fine-tune it, you can get much better results than you might anticipate. So what OpenAI is doing is now allowing people to fine-tune 3.5 Turbo, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but a lot of the startups that came about as a result of OpenAI's API, they're kind of not needed anymore because of this. This immediately killed a lot of those initial ideas, it feels like. If your website was just a front end for OpenAI's API, it may not necessarily be as valuable anymore. And like the article talks about here, fine-tuning allows you to do a lot more with less. You'll get a faster response, you'll get a more relevant response. And the more you continue to work with it and tune it, the more you'll expect the same results over and over again. It becomes a little bit more predictable. Now, obviously, OpenAI is not going to allow you to just tune this on anything. You can't make this into a scarier model than it is. So they're going to have a moderation process. And if you're thinking about maybe training something as powerful as GPT-4, that's actually coming a little bit later this year. But probably won't be nearly as cheap. Because as far as cost goes, 75,000 words looks to be about $2.40, give or take. Using something like this to train on work that you've written yourself will make OpenAI's tool write more like you do. You could train it on tweets or different formats, different outputs. So while this might not sound super exciting, it's actually very, very powerful, and it's something that I'm sure a lot of companies are really looking forward to. Now, I don't really have a big update here, and I know I did touch on this in the past, but I did want to bring it back to the forefront just so people are aware that this is likely about to happen, and probably very soon. YouTube is working with Universal Music Group to bring AI music to the fold. I think both parties, YouTube and UMG, are looking to make as much money off of AI music, or really just music and artists, as possible. With both YouTube and UMG being kind of notorious for capitalizing on other people's work and really not being super fair to the original creators, whether it's through ads on YouTube's side or royalties on UMG's side, there's a possibility that something like this could cut artists out of the mix completely. And if that turns out to be the case, it's going to be a matter of people voting with their time, their watch time, and their wallets to determine whether or not this becomes the new normal. Because mark my words, if YouTube and UMG can find a way to cut artists out of the mix completely and just make money without them, they will. In the world of law and regulation, I did want to touch on this story because it's something that I'm seeing a lot of people bring up over and over and over again, but it's actually nothing new to what we saw in the previous rulings with laws and regulation. This was yet another example of the US Copyright Office saying, no, you can't submit something that's purely AI generated and try to copyright it. Again, no different than the rulings that have been made previously. Unfortunately, with this one, I think a lot of people got caught up in the headlines, and I saw a lot of artists, especially on Twitter, get really riled up again as if this was something new. In fact, what I'll say here, I'm going to segue a little bit over to the writer's strike, because we've talked about that off and on for weeks. With the writer's strike, as they work with these executives, they're going to come to an agreement that's going to allow writers to use AI like a tool. And as they do, what that's going to do is not just normalize AI, but it's also going to create copyrighted AI work. And at that point, I believe what we're going to see is work that is absolutely copyrighted, that's not purely AI generated, it's AI assisted. And from there, as time marches on, we're just going to see it happen more and more often. Going back to the copyright issue itself, there's a number of themes that continue to come up. Human authorship is paramount. It's absolutely required for any type of copyright. There's the famous photo of the monkey that's taken a picture of itself, and that created a copyright case of its own because of this very issue. They want to avoid the idea of just having a machine that can make things for you that you could own, sort of like a robotic slave, I guess. Which I agree with, especially as we continue to make strides towards AGI. Probably not the best idea. But again, in the recurring theme we continue to see here is when it talks about the absolute, where no human is involved. When there's some human involvement, it seems like the door is pretty wide open. And that, I think, is going to be the copyright future that we start to see. You using Adobe Photoshop can use Adobe Firefly and copyright the output because you are part of the process. You using Photoshop and being able to use generative tools, you should still be able to take credit and copyright the work that you put in. But if your part in the work itself was just simply owning a tool, that's really not the same thing. As more of these cases go on and we see the same arguments or different arguments with different or similar forms of media, we're going to further hone AI and copyright law into something a little bit different than it was before. But this continues to set a little bit more precedent than what we had previously. While these headlines might be implying something new, we have to remember that back in February when we dealt with the Zarya of the Dawn controversy, the art wasn't copyrightable because it was simply AI generated, but the text and the layout were, and still are. All right, let's get into some new technology, especially as it comes to climate change. I know it's been very hot for a lot of people. So I've seen some articles about wildfires, I've seen articles about solar and all kinds of different stuff where AI is being used to help with some of the changes that have taken place in our new world. Especially more recently, we've seen just how devastating fires can get when they get out of control, and they get out of control very fast. So California's put in place an AI-powered system. It's using high-definition cameras to use machine learning AI technology to locate fires as quickly as possible so the responders can get there before it becomes a cataclysm. This might actually be one of those areas where I don't know that we'd necessarily prefer a human to do the job of a computer, because the job is traditionally done by humans looking at over 1,000 cameras and really just looking for smoke. The article talks about it being a very tiring job. But you can just simply imagine the advantage of having cameras, having infrared sensors, having all of those things, and having it be a completely automated system. It just seems much safer that way. Still, the way the technology stands right now, it does require human involvement to verify so that there's no false positives. We're not sending people out there for nothing. As I look over this, I think that this is actually a pretty cool thing. The scariest part about this particular article was when I got down to the bottom and I looked at how many wildfires there actually are. I had no idea. There's a 5-year average of 5,400 fires in the summer months. And it's crazy to think that up until now, the system has been relying on people looking through cameras for smoke or waiting for 911 calls to come in. We can easily see a future where satellite imagery and AI is just simply used to automate that and instantly respond to things. Another big drop from Meta this week was Code Llama. Now, personally, up until now, I've only played with the code interpreter with GPT-4, and honestly, I've had a good time with that. I haven't messed with Copilot yet, I haven't messed with any of the other official coding services. But Code Llama, being an open source code generating AI, and hopefully has just as easy a time adapting and improving as regular Llama did, I would imagine we'll start hearing a lot more about this very soon. Now, do me a favor, if you're not a programmer, don't tune this out, because honestly, using a generative conversational model to speak to and ask questions to can really quickly teach you programming if you've ever had any interest. Normally, programming is a very difficult thing to wrap your head around. It's a very difficult thing to get through documents. It's a hard thing to talk to programmers and get responses that make sense. Programming tends to have a lot of foundational knowledge that you need so that other things make sense. But the advantage of having a conversational model is a lot easier than trying to understand it from scratch. It can also be much more specific to whatever the problem is that you're actually trying to work on, if you're not trying to learn about arrays in general, for example. So anyway, I point all that out because there are now so many tools for this very thing. I would highly recommend that everyone give it a shot and at least try their hand at it. You might find a new hobby that you love. Between Copilot and Code Whisper, Star Coder, and now Code Llama, you also got stable code that I haven't even messed with yet, Polycoder. And that's not even mentioning like Claude, Bard, or GPT-4, which also do coding, in addition to just being regular LLMs. This article admittedly doesn't have a lot of information about Code Llama. It is very vague because it is something that's just come out. It touches on some of the concerns that a lot of people have with generating malware, generating viruses, things like that. And to be honest, anyone with a little bit of programming knowledge and the ability to Google could create those very, very basic things. So while it's possible for these tools to create something like that, it is highly discouraged. And the teams at all of these different companies have certainly tried to build in tools to stop that from happening. But breaking through LLMs and getting them to do things that they're not supposed to do seems to be the trend. So we might even see some new content come out of this even next week. But in the meantime, let's talk about Meta's other new thing, which is a multimodal translator. We are now at a point in time where you have a tool in your pocket that can look at, translate back and forth just about every spoken language on the planet Earth. You're staring at proof that we live in the world of sci-fi nowadays. I mean, the article mentions Babelfish, which comes directly out of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There was the universal translator in something like Star Trek, or we have translator microbes for the Farscape fans out there. Meta has put together a single model that can apparently do all of this. It can identify a language and it can translate back and forth between two different languages at its disposal. And maybe you're looking at this as something similar to Google Translate, where it's like an app on your phone, but that's not necessarily what something like this might be able to do in the future. I want you to picture a future where something like Neuralink, or maybe something similar, functions, where you have computational tools in your own brain. And something like this, in addition to that, now has allowed you to translate every language on the planet. Now maybe I'm a techno-optimist for thinking about stuff like that, but the reality is we're not that far from this type of technology. Throughout my entire lifetime, science has looked at the brain as a very mysterious thing, and it now seems like we're making a lot of strides. We're figuring out a lot about how it works, how to translate it, how to read electrical signals, and how to translate electrical signals. Sensationalism aside, what they did was take a chunk of old data, where a patient had listened to this song in 2015 or something like that, with a bunch of electrodes on their brain. And then they were able to very recently use this data to decode the song and turn it back into music, using only the data from the electrodes. So in a case like this, the machine learning based AI is figuring out what the brain is actually communicating and how to translate. And much like how we talk about the inside of an AI model is a black box, the inside of a human brain is exactly the same thing. It's a collection of connections. It's different pathways that have formed in a very organic and very biomechanical way that we don't fully understand. But AI is a pattern recognition tool. And in cases like this, it's been able to find the patterns and figure out how it works and why it works. Which very nicely leads us into a future where things like this are possible, where someone who's paralyzed and unable to speak is now able to use an AI-assisted tool to translate thoughts into a voice and communicate with people. In a world before glasses, you would be disabled because you wouldn't be able to see. Now, with glasses, you can see. You're able to work. You're no longer disabled. And AI, step by step, is bringing us to a future where we're going to have less and less people that are considered disabled. On a more personal note, I think one of the scariest and most terrifying thoughts is that something can happen to me. You know, this is what I've built my whole life. This is who I am. My whole personality is part of my brain. And if something happens, whether it's a stroke or an aneurysm or something like that, you can lose it all in an instant. The idea of a technology like this at least existing and giving someone in that position the ability to communicate once again, that fills me with a ton of hope, especially in a world where everyone is trying to scare the crap out of you when it comes to AI. But as time marches on, I encourage every single one of my viewers continue to keep an open mind and look at this technology for what it could be, not what people are scared it could also become. A lot of the fears that people have are completely unfounded. There's no scientific data that's showing that AI is going to do anything evil, but everyone assumes that because they themselves in a position of power might do something evil. And something to really think about is that if AI technology can do stuff like this for a brain that's been damaged in any capacity, you can imagine the new features, the new benefits, the things that it could potentially do for a healthy brain where we're simply adding new stuff to it. And as much as there's a lot of naysayers in the news and a lot of people who are purposely trying to make you very, very afraid of a future that will probably never happen, I see a future where there are so many new capabilities, and it feels like humanity can finally reach its next stage in evolution. I appreciate every single one of you who like, subscribe, even the people I got last week who I didn't really have good content for you last week, so I apologize for that. And so I'll leave you on that note. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you next week for another AI news, drama, and updates. Thanks for watching.